All right. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the latest edition of the Comet Community Office Hours. I'm Emily Lewis, the Content and Community Manager here at Comet, and I am so excited to welcome today's guest, Head of Research, Dr. Douglas Blank. Dr. Doug is probably one of the coolest people who works at Comet, and you'll soon see why. After 21 years as a professor at Bryn Mawr College in Pennsylvania, he made the switch from academia to the startup world. Dr. Doug earned his PhD from Indiana University Bloomington with a thesis in cognitive science consisting of an early neural network that was trained to make analogies in symbolic relations and images. Later on, his research focused on using neural networks to control a robot that went through developmental stages as it sought out interesting aspects of its environment. And this has actually become the new field of developmental robotics. Dr. Doug, thank you so much for joining us today.
Great to be here.
Awesome. So yeah, I've got a whole load of questions. We'll see what we can get through. And of course, if anyone watching has anything that we don't address, feel free to leave a comment and we will try to get Dr. Doug's take. So first and foremost, what made you decide to pursue work in the startup space after decades in academia?
Yeah, that's a great question. I must admit, it wasn't one decision. It was really a series of decisions. I guess the first decision came to leave academia, and that was a hard one. But because taking a step back, I did do my PhD in neural networks. So what we now call deep learning was exactly what I did my PhD topic on. And that was at the beginning of the 90s. And it wasn't that I chose that area and that topic because it looked like it was going to be really productive, but I chose it because that looked like a really effective way of doing learning. And I was really interested in learning. I did my PhD and I went into academia, which was just a default path for me. I didn't think too much about going into industry during those years. I love the idea of going into academics and having a lab and doing my own research. And I love teaching. So that sort of took me down that path without reservation. Of course, deep learning, as it became to be known, turned out to be really effective. But that didn't really start happening until 2015, 2016, 2017. It really became obvious that this is really starting to work. It's really starting to fulfill the promise that we had, that we thought, those of us that were interested in neural networks specifically and learning also. So that was really fantastic, but I never really got to teach anything based from my dissertation. I was at a small liberal arts school outside Philadelphia, Bryn Mawr College, and I loved teaching there. However, I just didn't get to my real, that being machine learning and eventually also applying that to robots. So the first decision was, could I really leave academia? And I decided yes. So when it became possible to do that, I was able to retire. I say retire in quotes, because it was when I turned 55, I could still keep some of the benefits for having my kids go to college. And I was able to step away from academia and consider something next. So I had no idea really what I was going to do. I imagined that I was going to sit on a beach and write some books about machine learning and neural networks and robots and maybe education as well. I learned a lot and published a lot in educational materials over the years. So I felt like I had some stories to tell. However, I read into Gideon, our CEO at Comet, over a mailing list. And I was just answering some questions that he had about using Jupyter notebooks. And I didn't know that he had a company that was connected to machine learning. He said, "Why don't you come up to New York?" I was in Philadelphia, and let's talk. So I went up and talked to Gideon. And it turned out at that point, we had much more than just Jupyter notebooks. We were really interested in a lot of the same things. And he had this new startup that was focused on experiment management. We hit it off, and I met Nimrod, our CTO at Comet. And this looked really fun and interesting. I said, yeah. And so, without how I made most of my choices through my life, I just fell into it and just got really lucky. And I really love what I do at Comet.
Amazing. Yeah, definitely feel for you. We're not actively on a beach every day. There's still time. I'm sure we could still get some books written at some point.
I still have that idea in the back of my mind. So I'm hoping to squeeze that in.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I'm sure we can make it happen. So, obviously, in your academia, you were really doing groundbreaking work throughout your PhD, and I'm sure too as you continue to teach and research. So, when you were building up this field of deep learning, this field of developmental robotics, did it feel momentous? Did it feel like you were creating something new? Or was it just, oh, yeah, this thing leads to this thing, leads to this thing, and it all came together?
Yeah, it didn't feel momentous or even influential at all. So, yeah, let me take a step back and describe at least my vision of what developmental robotics is. With most machine learning systems, the data scientist prepares the data set, and you basically just crank a crank and you push that through the neural network, and it has some kind of output that is trained to produce. And that works really amazingly effectively. Unlike when I was working on my PhD thesis, I imagined that we were going to have some real specialized models of attention and specialized models of categories. And we'd have to really work hard to try to make these really simplistic, just layers of math be able to be more comprehensive and behave more like humans. But it turns out we didn't need that extra work at all. What we really needed to do was expose these neural networks just to a huge amount of data. And it's not just it's still very crafted, handcrafted data, and you have to be very careful about how you create these sets and what you train it on, exactly how you set up the system. But some of the core ideas of being able to make analogies is what I was working on for my PhD topic. To be able to make these kinds of analogies, you don't need special hardware. You don't need like an attention mechanism built into the system. It really just falls out naturally. And that's beautiful. That was one of the reasons that I got interested in neural networks. It seemed like some of that could happen. But that's still biased. It's still the human has to be there to hand feed these systems. The idea of developmental robotics is one where the system gets to decide what it's paying attention to. And so the idea of being motivated to do one thing or another drives the system. And so the idea is that if you really want a system not just to be able to create some really interesting pictures or even turn the steering wheel a little bit left, a little bit apply the brake, apply the gas, if you really want to have like true human level understanding and comprehension and abilities, then these systems need to be self-motivated. They need to be bootstrapped from the bottom up to pay attention to what they want to pay attention to. And that way they could still get big data, but it would be self-driven big data. So that the whole idea of working motivation and then having the system control itself is one that is we don't explore yet. We're just not to the point yet. But I have downplayed the idea to myself and others in the past because I wasn't sure of how effective it was going to be, this idea. But I think it was about 15 years ago, I was giving a presentation on developmental robotics, the core ideas and the motivation for the task, the whole project. And at the end, I was talking to a NASA engineer, and I said, I don't know how useful this is going to be. And he said, no, if we had the ability for these systems to, like on the fly, be able to switch and pay attention to a different sensor or a different way of looking at the data, that would be groundbreaking. He said that they have satellites still to this day that are circling the Earth, but maybe one of the sensors has stopped working. But there's still enough information coming into the system. For example, and this is his example to me, he said it didn't really know which direction the satellite broken down, and so it lost control. But it was when it would revolve, the energy would spike because its solar system was facing the sun. So if it was able to realize that, it could still carry on a lot of functionality. And that was true. Really, some of the core ideas at the root of developmental robotics could allow a system like that. Maybe it would be far away from Earth, far away from humans. It could still, on its own, perhaps learn to adapt and do things that weren't directly programmed into it. So I think developmental robotics is an idea whose time is not yet come, but I'm confident that these are core ideas that we'll see play out in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like a lot of great innovation is quiet to start. You see a problem, you have a potential solution, and then it builds and becomes this thing that we just take for granted and just is needed.
Absolutely. When I first got my PhD, and I was a newly minted PhD in the 90s with a specialty in neural networks, I couldn't get it. I sent out 100 applications to 100 different universities and colleges, but no one was hiring for something in neural networks. All the rage at the time was logic and very symbolic ways of thinking. So these trends come and go. I'm not really one to follow trends. I got interested in this idea early on about neural networks. And so I still continue to learn about that. And I find the topic still very stimulating to me. Every new project, I learn something new about neural networks.
Yeah, which is so important to actually still be excited by that. And obviously, as head of research here, you get to work with pretty much every team, it feels, and across a lot of different projects. But what does a typical day look like for you and your team?
Ah, that's a good question, but I'm not sure there is a typical day. Although it has changed a little bit, at least on average, over the last 4 years. This fall will be my 4-year anniversary with Comet. So I've been here since nearly the beginning. In the early days, actually, that Nimrod asked me, "What do you want your title to be?" And I randomly, not completely randomly, but somewhat arbitrarily, I picked head of research. And Nimrod said, "That's a great title. Sure, we'll go with that." But there were so many things to do and so many different things to do that it didn't really have any bearing on what I did on a day to day basis. There were systems to be written, documentation to be written. I would talk to customers, potential customers. And even there were a few times where I was in the sales, if you can believe it or not. When you're a small startup, you're lucky to have a team that really can do lots of different things. And we did at Comet early on. Over the last few months and the last year, though, we really began to hire into all of the areas that we were doing less organized by whoever was available to do those, and really hiring experts in those particular areas, which has been fantastic to see that growth. And I'm not from industry, so watching the company grow around me has just been amazing and just incredible to see. And so a lot of times today, I spend my time still doing a lot of answering questions, some training to impart some of the wisdom over the last 4 years onto the newer team members. But I still get to talk to new clients, new potential clients. But I am glad to say today I'm much more focused about that core idea of head of research, looking forward, doing research on things, doing prototypes, seeing what we're missing. What is the next new thing? Can we be ready for that? So that's really rewarding. I really that part of my job. So I feel like that I was a little bit lucky in picking head of research 4 years ago, but I'm really happy to be doing that still to this day.
Yeah, and your team especially, I feel like every time I'm in a meeting, every time I get to hear what you guys are all working on, it's like something incredible and groundbreaking and amazing. So, yeah, it's really awesome when the rest of the company get to hear a sneak peek of some of that. And obviously, you came from the academia side, but for folks who are starting out or at the beginning of their careers in data science or in machine learning, do you have any advice for them? Like, what should they be focusing on? Should they try to be a generalist? Should they try to specialize? Do you have any advice for new people coming into the industry?
Yeah, that's a tough question. There's so many classes and free available resources available these days. How to be a data scientist in 3 minutes, or even how to be a data scientist in 10 lessons. Some of these are a little bit overblown in the promise. I feel like I'm still becoming a data scientist, and I've been working in this area for 30 years. So it's a continual learning process. But I would say to people getting started, follow your own instincts, follow your own interests. If Oftentimes when people ask me that question, I would say, what are you interested in? It doesn't have to be necessarily be computing related at all, but maybe you like to drink wine, or you like to read books or write poetry. What is a system that you would you could imagine that might be just a toy to play with. Could you create a system that writes its own poetry? Could you come up with a recommending system that would recommend to you what movie you should watch next? So pick something that's very personal to you, that you really have a vested interest in, and see if you can build it, and start with your own goal, and then dive into the materials that are freely available or some really good books that are available, and then try to build that thing for you. Try to make it really personal for you. And then if you like it and it works out, then there are lots of jobs in data science available at all different levels and doing many different kinds of things. I think that's probably some good advice.
No, that's fantastic advice. Yeah, really grounding it in what's important to you, what gets you excited. I'm sure it can get overwhelming. I've seen lists of the top projects you need to have in your list of tricks, and it just seems to be never ending. And there's a lot of noise around the job market with so many startups. So, yeah, definitely fantastic advice. And I'm sure a lot of people are making a note and writing that down. Good way to approach it. So, I wanted to kind of shift a little bit away from work because obviously what you do is super interesting and we could honestly chat about it all day. But you currently live in San Francisco. Obviously, you spent so much of your time in Pennsylvania. What's been your favorite part of living in an entirely different part of the country and working 100% remote?
Yeah, so you're right. We moved to San Francisco, I guess it's been 2 years ago. Unfortunately, that time was a really bad time to move basically to any new city in the world. So when we got here, COVID was really ramping up and we were being very careful. We drove across the country from Philadelphia to San Francisco, my two adult kids, two dogs, a cat, my wife, and all of the materials that we needed to camp along the way, or at least cabin stay. So it was because largely we like to do that. And also because of COVID, we thought one of the safest ways would be not to go into hotels and motels. We weren't looking to do that, but to stay at cabins and campsites along the way. It turned out to be, if there's a silver lining in my mind to COVID, it's that I got to spend another couple of years with my kids that we probably wouldn't have been able to do. One's 27, one's 24. They're both adults now, but they both live with us now in San Francisco. So they both really love California and we enjoy having them. So the dogs, we still have the dogs, the cats, the kids, they're all here with us in San Francisco. So I must admit that we haven't really felt like we've moved into the city yet, but we love San Francisco. We're starting to get out and we've been to inside actual restaurants now in the past year. It's just a wonderful place. And I think we're going to stay in the area for the rest of our lives.
That's amazing. Yeah, finding a place that feels good, that feels like home, that feels comfortable, especially after so many decades in one place is definitely valuable. And we're very lucky we have a good chunk of our team is out in the Bay Area, so you can actually meet some folks in person. And
That's right.
obviously,
We
yeah,
try
yeah.
we try to go out for drinks every once in a while. So it's been
Good.
great to have some colleagues here in the Bay Area.
Yeah, being able to connect in person, it's been really nice, especially as things open up a little bit. And I have one more question. I know we don't want to keep you too long here. You've got a busy day, but outside of working and obviously hanging out with your family, are there any kind of go-to anything that you would just absolutely love to do, can't get enough of? I know you said you do a lot of camping, with the family, but where can we find Dr. Doug on the off?
That's a good question. We do get away every once in a while when we can to do a little bit of camping. We still do that. The kids, I think they still have the pandemic trek in their mind, so they're not interested in doing the camping with us, which is great. We oftentimes take the dogs and get out of town every once in a while. One thing I do is I just got an electric bike, and that's a lot of fun driving around the city. I'm getting a little bit older, so a little bit of extra electric bike help makes trips up and down the hills here in SF very enjoyable.
Yeah, I would not be brave enough to try and do that the old manual way. So
No.
I'm right there with you with the electric. Awesome. Well, Dr. Doug, thank you so much for chatting with me today. If you want to get some more insight, please be sure to check out a previous office hours session starring Dr. Doug. We got his insights into reproducibility in machine learning and data science. I'll, of course, link all of those below. And if you have any other follow up questions for Dr. Doug or anyone we've had on the show so far, please feel free to connect with me on our community Slack group or reach out to me over email at emily@comet.com. And we've got even more amazing interviews coming up. So be sure to subscribe and follow us on Twitter and LinkedIn. Dr. Doug, thanks so much for being here today.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. I enjoyed talking to you.
Awesome. All right. Thanks, everyone. Take care. Hey everyone, just wanted to say that you might also like the latest episode of the Cool Data Project show hosted by my colleague Kristen Kerr. Be sure to watch the complete playlist. I'm going to link it down below so you don't miss any of the latest and greatest innovations in data science and honestly, some of the coolest things that are being done by the coolest people in the industry. I'm also really thrilled to share the following video with you so that you can get a sense of what our community of practitioners just like you are doing with Comet. Huge shout out to all of the folks at Data Science Nigeria for putting this together. Please let us know, what are you using Comet for? What new features do you want? Make sure you're joining us on our Slack community so that we can share what you're doing and we can hear your voice. Thank you, everyone. Enjoy the following video.
Hi guys, my name is Ibrahim Ogubi, but you can call me Geek. So I'm a technical writer at Comet.ml. So Comet.ml is actually a platform that allows you to keep track of your model experiments. Now, listen, or for instance, you are a data science competition addict. Now, instead of you keeping track of your model experiments, your model hyperparameters and the evaluation metrics manually, you can quickly just employ Comet. So I'm happy to be part of the community. You should try and just use Comet. It's very intuitive and it's very easy to use.
Hi there, my name is Marvelous and I want to share my experience on using Comet. Comet is a machine learning platform that integrates well with your tools and help you manage your models. Among the things I've used Comet for, it's been wonderful. Part of it is using Comet to manage my models and the accuracy of my models, everything from the point to sending the data to deployments. So Comet is a nice platform, it's a nice tool to use as a machine learning engineer or data scientist. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Olusha Jeremiah. I'm a data scientist and a technical writer at Comet.ml. Comet.ml has really made a tremendous impact on my career in that they allow me to share my ideas on data science and machine learning algorithms, and also they give me a space to actually learn from other data scientists that have written some great articles. It's the best.
Hello, everybody. My name is data scientist and a technical writer from Nigeria. So I use Comet to track my models, monitor my models in production, and also build interactive visualization. Comet is easy to integrate and improve your training on the environment. And trust me, as a data scientist or an MLOps practitioner, you should definitely check out the Comet platform. Big shout out to the Comet team and Comet community for awesome tool. And big shout out to the team for creating Heartbeat, which enables developers, data scientists, contribute to open source by writing machine learning.
I hope you guys enjoyed that as much as I did. I absolutely love hearing things that our community is doing with Comet. And please share with us, what are you doing? Make sure that you're following us on our community Slack channel where you can interact with other community practitioners and have your questions answered by some of our Comet experts. We'll see you next time.